Hey everyone, and welcome to Risky Business. My name's Patrick Gray. We've got a great show for you this week. We'll be chatting with Adam Boileau about all of the week's security news, and then we'll be hearing from this week's sponsor. And this week's show is brought to you by Nebuloc, which makes, I guess, what they're describing as a bit cheekily, as a vibe hunting platform, right? So this is an AI-enabled threat hunting platform where instead of having to like comb through horrible blog sources and do a whole bunch of stuff manually, you can kind of ask it, hey, is anything weird going on? And can you have a bit of a deeper look at that and answer these questions? And, it's actually pretty cool stuff. So the Nebuloc founder, Damien Lukey, is along in this week's sponsor interview to chat about some work they've done on Sigma. Sigma detections for macOS, basically taking what they're calling core Sigma detections for macOS and piping them through to Elastic. So you too can have that information in Elastic. Things like, I don't know, there was an unsigned kernel extension load on your macOS box. That seems like something you might want to know about, and it's actually currently a little bit difficult to know these things. So that is actually a really interesting interview. Do stick around for that. But first up, Adam, let's get into the news. Although, actually, before we get into the news, we've got to say a big shout out to our editor slash producer slash seriously risky business host, Amberly Jack, who is laid up recovering from surgery.
Yeah, she's definitely been looking forward to that for a while. So I'm glad that it's been done, and we'll see her back at work, towards the end of the year, early next year, I think. So yes, it'll be good. We'll miss her, unfortunately.
We are working harder and enjoying her slacking us photos of her with 2 thumbs up on the good stuff. They give her the good stuff in recovery from surgery. So Amberly, hope you're feeling okay, mate. And looking forward to having you back. All right. But by the way, for those of us joining on YouTube, this is why there's no superimposed, images or news ticker or anything like that. I ain't doing all that. That's Amberly's job. So we'll wait for her to get back. Before that resumes again. Now, look, we're going to start with a story that is not actually cybersecurity, but is definitely about patching and the perils of patch management. Airbus had a hell of a week. It turned out that cosmic rays caused a bit flip in a controller, something that controls the elevators of the Airbus A320 plane, and that has led to them issuing an emergency directive that all of the operators of this aircraft needed to roll back to a previous version of the firmware that controlled this device. This caused groundings of airlines all around the world and just threw the world's airline system into absolute chaos. But I mean, this is ultimately the story about a patch.
Yeah, it's a software patch management story, which is pretty wild. There was, I think it's something like 6,000 Airbus A320 family aircraft around. They demanded that all of them have this particular software version rolled back on their elevator controllers, which in some planes is a in situ software thing. And in some configurations, you actually have to pull the device and replace it with one that's been downgraded, in the maintenance facility beforehand. So pretty disruptive. Airbus has said that it is because of cosmic ray bit flips, and there was there was a solar storm, some heightened activity in the Earth's magnetic field and so on that could have done that. I've seen some people saying, well, actually the peak of the solar storm had already kind of passed at that point. So, but bit flips can happen.
To be clear, what they're alleging happened is that some solar activity caused cosmic rays to flip a bit somewhere in an Airbus's sort of control system, which resulted in an Airbus A320 having an uncommanded pitch down, right? Which put everyone in 0G, a couple people got injured, and then they looked into it and they're like, oh, okay, this was a bit flip. And you sort of wonder why the updated version of this firmware couldn't deal with a flipped bit, whereas the previous one could. And you sort of think, well, maybe they took out some checksumming or something to... Apparently the newer version has new features. And you wonder if the reason that they couldn't keep the sort of integrity checking is because they needed the processing headroom for these new features. I just think it's an interesting software engineering story. Yeah,
it certainly is. I mean, and I've seen, some people in the airline industry, airline industry commentators talking about it, saying that there are some safety features that were in the new version that, of course, now that they're rolling back, that they're not going to have. There's some things that may improve the characteristics of the plane in certain, when it's an alternate control law and it's approaching a stall, then there is some software that dealt with that circumstance that they've rolled back. But yeah, it's kind of unclear, how one of the things I read was that the older versions would refresh particular parameter values in memory more often, which maybe leads to your idea that, there wasn't enough headroom with these new features and they had to take something out, and that was the thing that got taken out. But we don't really know whether that was accidental or, well, I guess it wouldn't be accidental in the aircraft industry, but like what the trade-offs were that led to that. But anyway, net result for most people is standing around waiting, for their planes, and all of this because patch management's hard. And I actually had a friend of mine say, well, like, surely these things have automated, updates these days. Why does this require plane stops? And like, that's, this is the only area of technology where we have good, robust controls around something like patch management. So it's actually really nice to see this happening in the real world compared to, CrowdStrike, where we're just going to YOLO roll out an update and, brick computers all around the world because
I'm not complaining about I'm not complaining about there being no OTA updates for your Airbus, right? Like, this component apparently is made by Thales, and you've seen pictures. I don't know if they're just file pictures of people updating other components, but it's of someone with a terminal plugged into the thing.
Yeah.
In the tail of the aircraft, actually updating the firmware. And I'm glad it doesn't have some random LTE modem in there, downloading a bunch of code and not actually checking the signatures properly, right? Which is how it would normally be if it's an OTA update.
That is how it would normally. I mean, imagine if we made banks and enterprises and government agencies responsible for the integrity of their computer systems the way we do for airline operators. So this seems like a good news story all around.
Yeah. I don't know, though. I think it's just connecting them to the internet kind of would be a mistake, and you can't really take the bank stuff off the internet. But sure, okay, we'll go with that. That's fine.
I guess like the rigor is what I mean.
I'm sure. I get it. All right, now, look, speaking of, carefully rolling out technology that we really understand the implications of, let's have a chat about AI now. And the US Congress is asking the chief executive of Anthropic to come along and have a chat about this recent campaign that we spoke about a couple of weeks ago, where a Chinese APT, presumably the MSS, were automating part of their campaign using Anthropic. I think, based on the comments we've seen from people on various committees, I think this could actually be an intelligent conversation. So the House Homeland Chair Representative Andrew Garbarino from New York said this incident is consequential for US Homeland Security because it demonstrates what a capable and well-resourced state-sponsored cyber actor, such as those linked to the PRC, can now accomplish using commercially available US AI systems, even when providers maintain strong safeguards and respond rapidly to signs of misuse. So I think, okay, it's slightly encouraging, but I still think it's missing the point, because they could have just done this just as easily with by spinning up, DeepSeek. I don't think the it used US technology angle is particularly interesting here. What do you think?
No, I felt the same thing. That felt like a bit of a rah-rah. Let's advertise how good US technology is, kind of bit of it, rather than a meaningful piece of it. But like, it's good to have these conversations, and I'm glad that they are talking about this stuff at this kind of level, rather than there's been so much kind of there's so much room given to AI companies to kind of go out and innovate right now, that having any kind of oversight at all seems like a good step. But it does, I'm not sure how meaningful it's going to be. Like, I mean, you can kind of imagine the level of questions that Anthropic, and I think like the CEO of Google Cloud's going to be there as well, and some other companies like. So I'm not confident that it's going to be a super detailed and deep round line of questioning. But it's good that we are having these conversations at all.
Well, I don't think they're going to table IOCs, if that's what you mean, right? Like, I think keeping it at a high level is kind of okay for Congress, but I don't know. It sort of seems like a hearing that, we'll at least be tracking at some point.
Yeah.
Moving on, and we've got a decent post-mortem of the latest Shai-Hulud worm attack. This one's been written up by a company who the name I still can't believe exists, PostHog.
Yes, and this one's interesting because they are one of the patient zeros. So they were compromised to seed the initial deployment of the Shai-Hulud worm, along with a couple of other places. And they've got a write-up of how the attackers went through the process of compromising them. And that's actually quite an interesting kind of campaign in itself, like the process of doing that. They managed to kind of sneak a commit in, they submitted a pull request for a commit that they had made that kind of exploited a misunderstanding in some of the automation workers used when they process commits. And PostHog has written up and said, like, we straight up didn't really understand how this particular, GitHub integration worked exactly. GitHub's actually changing some of that behavior because it is confusing. And they talk through that initial kind of intrusion process. So that kind of speaks to the cunningness of the attackers that were behind this. Like, they had plenty of tricks up their sleeve. And I think, the PostHog write-up is actually really good, like great details of the worm itself, but also good details of the process they went through and some of the steps they're taking to address it. So yeah, like, in the end, kind of good job writing it up and good job responding to it.
Yeah, we had a bit of feedback too from a listener via Blue Sky who was saying that, we got it wrong when saying that the NPM solution to this is to introduce manual steps into the publishing process. But this is I think it's more of a miscommunication, I guess, because there is, basically NPM's solution here, a GitHub solution, is to gate all of these repo updates through some sort of CI/CD pipeline, right? So you got like a trusted platform where you can submit code and it goes through this and, then winds up in your repos. But I think there's also like U2F challenges and stuff involved, which is the manual bit that you were talking about. Like, clear this up for us, would you?
So there's a couple of bits here. One is NPM for the case where you do just want to publish a package yourself. It will require U2F or some kind of like human in the loop auth as an interim step, I guess. But that will probably be there forever. But the real thing they're trying to do is move to a point where, yes, everything goes through a CI/CD pipeline, and there's some technical mechanisms for doing like short-lived tokens issued by the CI/CD integration provider itself, so like GitHub in the case of many people, that then can be trusted through a like federated auth mechanism into the publishing provider. So NPM or PyPy or whatever other platform is taking the artifacts made by the build process. So there's sort of a technical level of automation there. But really the overall goal here is to push responsibility for the integrity of code, and therefore the artifacts generated and published, back up into the code repository, and therefore back up into the human process. So in the case of a big open source project, it's not going to be particularly likely that one person can commit, approve, and publish a piece of code, that there'll be more people involved, and that's the kind of level of human checking. And then all of that human interaction is gated behind some kind of U2F or other phishing resistant auth. So it's kind of, everybody's right in a way. Like, there is more automation in the publishing side, but the goal is to push auth back up to where humans are and where they are able to make better decisions about the code and the repositories and the rules around how and when stuff can be built and deployed and published and so on.
Well, and I think one of the positives of that approach too is you have fewer long-lasting like access tokens and secrets lying around, right?
Yes, exactly. And in the PostHog write-up of the Shai-Hulud bit, they discussed whether using that kind of short-lived token would have actually helped in their particular case. For the pre-Shai-Hulud kind of patient zero part. And their conclusion was it probably wouldn't have, because the attackers were moving sufficiently quickly that they would be within the time limits of those kind of like interim tokens. So, nothing is going to make this a perfect process, but anything that means you are less likely to leave tokens lying around, and then the value of those tokens is either more tightly scoped or reduced in time or have some other kind of restrictions on it. All of that absolutely improves the resilience of the ecosystem as a whole, and it's a good plan.
Yeah, so we've linked through to a bunch of stuff talking through all of that. So if you're really interested, you can go through to this week's show notes at risky.biz and have a read. Now we got a write-up from a friend of the show, John Tuckner, over at Secure Annex, looking at these VS Code extensions that are malicious, and he's had a look at 23 extensions which copy other popular extensions. I mean, this stuff isn't new, but it's a good write-up on how these people are getting these extensions into these stores and making them look legitimate by doing things like running up the downloads. And he's got a great, he's got some great screen caps here where he's got the bad ones next to the good ones, and it's real hard to tell the difference.
Yeah. I mean, some of these are like cryptocurrency related things, and like it's basically impossible to tell just at a glance which of these is legitimate and which is not, which of course is the point of the process, and that's how they get you. There was a ongoing campaign that's been going for I think a month or two now, targeting VS Code extensions in the Microsoft Store and some of the other kind of related stores. So yeah, the idea of kind of leveraging that trust and then using it to target extensions, is not just a thing that's limited to browsers, right? We're seeing in other platforms, and the tradecraft that we've seen in browser extensions is absolutely applicable in those other places, and that's kind of one of the things that he's written up here.
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of them in VS Marketplace and a bunch in Open VSX. And I mean, I guess this is the point, right, is the supply chain is absolutely a mess. And it's not just limited to things like Shai-Hulud worms and, the occasional dodgy commit or typo squatting in NPM. Like, top to bottom, I feel like this is, there's going to need to be some real work done here to sort this out, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. And the problem is it's really quite hard because most of the controls that we see in place in code marketplaces and app stores and things is there is an initial bunch of checks at time of kind of like when you originally set up or deploy it, and then subsequent updates don't get the same amount of scrutiny. And in the case of browser extensions and this kind of VS Code stuff, a lot of it is submitting something that's useful and perfectly valid, and then 6 months down the line, replacing it or updating it with some kind of malicious thing. And that can lead to, a lot of success. Even people who will sell their extensions after they've got bored of them, go around and offer to buy, unloved extensions that have an install base and then, update them with malware. It's that's something that people have done with great success in the past.
Yeah, so Secure Annex does a lot of work tracking things like VS Code extensions, Chrome browser extensions and whatnot. Another company that does similar stuff but different kind of approach is Koi. And Koi has a write-up here on a group they're calling Shady Panda, which they reckon, and it's amazing, right? Because I've been banging on about stuff like browser extensions for years. And they don't often make the news. And it's like, oh, well, it never happens. It's like, well, that's because no one's really looking at it. And they've taken a look, and apparently over 7 years, this group, Shady Panda, conducted a campaign that infected 4.3 million Chrome and Edge users with malicious extensions. Seems like a pretty comprehensive write-up here too.
Yeah, they kind of look through the timeline as the people get more experienced with how they're gonna work it and various features that some of their that they've added over the years. But yeah, getting to the point where their extensions are stealing all of the cookies, all of the form input, all of the browser histories, all of the mouse clicks. So they've got multiple ways to kind of turn that into money or turn that into onwards access. In some cases, also just having these extensions poll an endpoint for arbitrary JavaScript to run. So when they want to do something more exotic that they haven't thought of, they can just task their fleet of browsers. And this is the same kind of thing where they take submit a good extension, let it run for a while, and then update it. And in the case of, the Google Chrome / Microsoft Edge store, the controls there are really not great for updates. So it's kind of humbling when you see how successful this stuff is. And, I know people who've been hacked by browser extensions getting updated, and like it can happen, right? It's even if you are kind of conscious about it, like this is a very hard thing, especially when you install a browser extension, it works for a while, you just forget about it, it sits there, and then 8 months later, bam, you're infected with an info stealer. It's pretty rough.
Yeah, I mean, controlling this sort of thing is quite difficult as well, right? Like, you can do it with, Microsoft and Google, browser management stuff, but it's hard. It's harder than it should be.
Yeah, and like at an enterprise scale, it's difficult. And then even if you get to if you are going to let your users install extensions at all, like having approved trusted ones is kind of like the gold standard. But even those can be taken over because, you're just saying, I trust this person who I don't really know to put stuff in my browser, and maybe they're trustworthy today, but 6 months from now, a year from now, things can be different. And the mechanisms for dealing with that are very limited, unfortunately.
Well, yeah. I mean, you've got Airlock Digital have allow listing for browser extensions, which is really cool. And then you've got, as I mentioned, like John Tuckner, like I've got no business relationship with Secure Annex or John at all, zero. But I think what he's got there is a really good business where you can pay him money to monitor extensions that are present in your environment. So you just give him a list and he charges like per extension. And if one of them goes rogue, you get an email or you get a, Slack or, whatever it is, however he notifies you. And that way you can go and take care of it because, you're quite right. Even if you've got that control element, whether or not that's using the native tools from Microsoft, Google, or using something third party, more like the airlock approach, that's only useful if you actually know when to act, right? And no one's really doing a good job of detecting this stuff. So I think this is going to just continue to like keep trucking on, right? And become more and more of a problem. But, I've been saying that for years and it hasn't really accelerated yet. But, when these things kick off, it tends to happen quick. So I reckon it's better to be prepared now, personally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, browser extensions don't make me feel good. So yeah, being prepared and having some solution to this problem, I think is pretty important because as we make things harder elsewhere, as we U2F everywhere, as we do all sorts of other things more robustly, attackers just going to move around and browser extensions are, they're a juicy target.
They sure are. All right, so let's talk about some classic Krebsing, because Brian Krebs has identified, what looks to be a fairly key player in the old Scattered Lapsus Hunters, advanced persistent teenagers kind of crew. And it looks like he's like a 15-year-old Jordanian kid, maybe with some Irish heritage as well. Maybe I think it looks like an Irish mum and a Jordanian dad living in Jordan. And this is pretty brutal stuff, right? Because the thread that Brian pulled on was when this guy dropped a screen cap of a it was a scam email that he got that said, we've accessed your email account using password, and then inserted his old password from like some old dump or whatever, or from an info stealer log apparently. And he screen capped it, redacted his email address and popped it into a Telegram channel saying, "Oh no, look at me, I'm done, ha ha ha," being sarcastic. But he didn't redact the password. So from there, all you needed to do was look up that fairly unique password, match it to an email address, and then onwards from there. And Brian wound up talking to this guy.
Yeah, he correlated infrastealer logs and figured it out. Ended up identifying the dad and emailing the dad because the dad appears to work at Royal Jordanian Airlines from the infrastealer logs. So he mails the dad saying, "Hey, I think your son's into something shady, et cetera, et cetera." The dad thinks it's a scam and forwards it to the son for tech advice. And then the son's like, "Well, I guess I'm cooked now." Decides to reach out to Brian, has a conversation about it, tells Brian that he's kind of winding down his involvement, claims he's winding down his involvement with, I think he used to be involved with the Hellcat ransomware team, and then that's the basis for some new Shiny Hunters, Scattered Lapsus Shiny Hunters ransomware that he's been AI modifying. Anyway, he says that he's trying to get out of it, and he's in touch with European law enforcement about it, although Krebs is pretty skeptical. And kid's 15 years old, so, the assessment that this is a bunch of teenagers, bang on here.
Yeah, there was a bit of research. It's not in this week's show notes. It's not in our run sheet, but there was a bit of research that was doing the rounds this week too, academic research that suggests that kids grow out of this stuff as well, which is kind of hopeful. By the time they're in their 20s, they all go off and get real jobs, which is interesting. But, see if you can avoid prison in the meantime, guys. Not so good. And speaking of that, Wired, helpfully, has published a guide to digital opsec for teens. This is Lily Hay Newman and JP Ormason over at Wired. So, maybe you should have read this opsec guide.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually a pretty good opsec guide, and it's just a funny juxtaposition that, if these criminals would follow such useful opsec guides, then they might do a little better, get a little less Krebsing going on. But it's quite a good write-up. And if you do have a teen in your life that is potentially into cybercrime and you'd like to help them avoid going to jail, definitely give them this. They're one of the authors of this piece originally started writing this for their 15-year-old daughter. So it's kind of geared towards teenagers, has some quite kind of teenagey sort of language in it. It's a useful resource for you to share with your family and friends.
Did you forward this to your teenage daughter?
I will have a conversation with her, yes.
Bet you will. Now, we got some follow-up reporting here on this guy, Michael Klapsis, who's an Australian guy in Perth. This is the guy who got busted spinning up fake Wi-Fi points using like a Wi-Fi pineapple on aircraft and in airports. And he was doing the typical thing, which is saying, oh, Qantas, free Wi-Fi and whatever. I'm waiting for people to click through. And then I guess it was like, enter your Facebook password or your iCloud password to get free access, that sort of scam, that sort of thing. What was really interesting about this case is that he got busted because one of the cabin crew noticed this, right? And was savvy enough to know what this guy was doing. So I'm pretty sure the way it worked is like they got him at the airport when they landed. He did all sorts of stuff. He tried to like remote wipe his phone and his laptop. He then like spied on his boss having meetings with the AFP, our federal police, our FBI, and whatnot. So yeah, he's gone down. He was convicted, but he's been sentenced, man. He's going to go down for 7 years for this. So what he was doing is he was taking these cred pairs, and dipping into people's like iClouds and whatever and stealing mostly nude images of young women, which is, like just a revolting crime. But I mean, it's unusual to see a sentence like this for a non-violent crime in Australia.
Yeah, I mean, 7 years, 4 months, I think, and he pled guilty as well. So, I mean, I guess the sentencing probably reflects a little bit of that. And yeah, that's a pretty serious sentence. I mean, as you say, it's a gross crime, and I'm not mad about him going to jail for it. But yeah, that's a fair amount of time in the clink.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's married with kids too, I think. But yeah, not good. He's eligible for parole in 2030, and yeah, just as I say, wanted to talk about it because I was really surprised to see a sentence like that from a Australian court. Now, we got a funny one just I wanted to touch on quickly, right? Because Reuters...
Those famous hackers over at Reuters.
Yeah, the elite red team over at Reuters apparently hacked the UK government's Office of Budget Responsibility to get the drop on a budget report and distributed it, before its intended release. So this has turned into a sort of minor scandal over in the UK. I'm sorry. And yeah, it looks really like what they did is they just guessed the URL by changing the, the date of the previous report with, today's date to November _ 2025. And of course, the way it works is, with corporate earnings results and these sorts of reports, you put the PDF onto the web server and then you press publish at the time that the results are supposed to go live. Now, what makes this funny for me personally is I covered Reuters doing exactly the same thing to a Swedish software company called Intentia. And I've got the story linked in this week's show notes. I was working for ZDNet at the time. That was published on October 29, 2002. So, and what's funny is the initial story where it's like Reuters got accused of hacking, like that has survived the bit rot on the internet, but the follow-up where it was determined that it was actually just, they guessed the URL, that story's lost forever, because I think that one didn't make it. This one made it global, but the other one, I think it just stayed on the ZDNet Australia site, and I think that one's lost to BitRot. But there you go. Reuters are elite URL guessers. And it was interesting at that time as well, because I spoke to lawyers and it's like, I think I still remember one of the quotes, which is, if you publish information, you can't get mad that people read it. Like if you put it onto you publish a PDF to the internet and someone guesses the URL, like that's not a security control. You haven't bypassed anything. It's perfectly legit. So the people getting cranky with Reuters need to chill, I would suggest. Now, you and I spoke a few weeks ago about the buildings being blown up at the KK Park complex. This is the scam compound in Myanmar. And we were like, you were flagging it already at that time of like, well, maybe this might be a little bit performative and just kind of like blowing up a couple of empty buildings for the cameras. And here we have a story from Wired by Matt Burgess that says, headline is, the destruction of a notorious Myanmar scam compound appears to have been performative. So good call, Adam. But yeah, walk us through this one.
Yeah, I mean, basically the deal is that they are the government there is trying to present an image that they're doing something about it without actually doing a whole bunch. There were suggestions that a bunch of the ringleaders and people kind of in charge of the compounds were basically allowed to walk and go off and, continue their operations elsewhere. And the actual KK Park compound itself, only a very small fraction of buildings appear to have been demolished, and we've seen some updated satellite photos, and it's just like one corner of the complex, which has, like 600 buildings, and they've demolished a couple of hundred or something. So like not a pretty, like not a small amount, like enough to make the photos look good, but probably not super effective. And it may well be that, maybe these buildings were surplus to requirements anyway, and they were going to, replace them with something else. So the idea that it would be performative, I think I feel a little bit justified in saying that, but that was, certainly even when we were reporting it, there was plenty of skepticism about whether they were serious at all about dealing to this. And it does not seem like that they are.
Well, I mean, I've always thought the biggest challenge in dealing with this stuff is the fact that those scam compounds represent something like, 40% of the GDP of Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia, right? Like it's just an absolutely insane amount of money. So when you think scam compound, what is the government in Myanmar doing about scam compounds? Just substitute the words scam compound in your head for money factory.
Yes.
Are they going to blow up the money factory, or are they going to try to seize control of the money factory, or get the people who run the money factory to give them money from the money factory? So I think that's really the issue is, in countries with small economies like these, when you have these money factories popping up, the temptation is always going to be too great to just get in on the action as opposed to trying to stop it. So, yeah. All right, let's move on. And Microsoft is making some changes that should help prevent people from running cross-site scripting attacks against its login interface. Please explain this better than I just did.
So the deal is Microsoft is rolling out an update to the content security policy on some of the Entra-Auth process, or the Microsoft Online Auth process. And this will restrict browsers' ability to execute script that didn't come from Microsoft. So if there is cross-site scripting vulnerabilities or other cases where script will be included, then the content security policy is designed to prevent that. Really, the funny thing is that, I'm impressed that there wasn't already a content security policy that said this, and that seems like a bit of a...
I mean, that's kind of what I was wondering. I'm like, hang on, they didn't have a content security policy?
Configuring a content security policy is fiddly, right? And I will give them that. Like, it's the kind of thing that you don't want to screw up, and then the process of rolling out is a bit fiddly, and you have to kind of collect logs and make sure, you have to put it in a monitoring mode, and then collect logs to see what would have been blocked that actually didn't get blocked, etc., etc. So it's fiddly. But on the other hand, we are talking about Microsoft here, center of the digital world. Their auth system, you would hope, would be CSPable. There are some edge cases, or there's other bits where the auth is actually done in other places. Because Microsoft has such a complicated ecosystem that there are other bits where this kind of CSP wouldn't be appropriate. But I think, overall, this is kind of a defense in depth control. And as Microsoft's, their secure future initiative thing where they are trying to take security more seriously again, going back and retrofitting, preventative controls like this to make future screw ups less of a problem. That's a good thing. They didn't have to do this, but it's good that they are. It's just, it shouldn't be necessary. They should have done this right in the first place. And, a comprehensive, robust CSP early on would have made sense, I would have thought. But
yeah, I mean, one of the reasons this all
scale.
One of the reasons this all came about, right, is because of that CSRB report into the incident where attackers stole keymat, right? Keymat that allowed them to mint tokens, and you looked into the report as to why Microsoft didn't actually stick this keymat into a HSM, and the answer was effectively because that's really hard.
Yeah.
And I think it's nice to see them moving on and actually doing sensible stuff, even if it's hard. And I'm guessing something like this, as you point out, at Microsoft scale is hard. So I think, you and I can both agree, looks like good news. Let's take it as good news.
Yeah, I mean, it is good news. And once they've done this well in one place, maybe it becomes policy, or maybe it becomes best practice for how they deploy other systems that need it. So, always steps in the right direction, but, it just shouldn't have been rubbish in the first place.
That's right. Now, moving on to a company we love, Fortinet. We've got some more Fortinet FortiWeb stuff to talk about. And this is there's bugs in old unsupported version of their WAF, which we'll get to in a minute. But I just want to tell a quick anecdote, which is on show days. So that's every Wednesday here in Australia. After the show, I do some other work. And then I go out with a group of friends and we go to a local pub. We eat some steak and just have a bit of a chat. There's a rotating lineup of characters, about eight dudes. And we all turn up and, have a steak. And last week I finished work, you know what I mean? I've done some stuff. I go off to have dinner. we're eating at this pub and there's a golf tournament on one of the TV screens in the pub, and everywhere is Fortinet signage. I guess they sponsor this tournament, and I'm trying to have a nice relaxing steak, Adam, and Fortinet is just projecting itself into my sight line. It was a disturbing meal, but walk us through this one. Is it more just typical comedy bugs from Fortinet?
So this is actually the same bug as last time. So this is the bugs we talked about last week in their FortiWeb, which they had patched, and it was in the SysOKev list. I think Rapid7 did some work and discovered that the same bugs also exist in older end-of-life versions of their FortiWeb, so the products that use their FortiWeb bits. And yeah, people, of course, are still running those, and those people are not going to get patches because there aren't patches, and they are going to get owned because Forti everything. So, I guess if you're running an unsupported Fortinet anything on the internet, like you've probably already been owned 47 times. So like this is actually zero difference for you. But still, it's just, it's any opportunity to, kick them in the old 40 nats, 40 nads, 40 balls, 40,
the 40 balls,
kick them in the 40 anything is always welcome on this show. So.
Man, you remember when we met those Fortinet people at OSCERT that time? Yes. That was funny. When they came up and they're like, hey, we love the show. It's like, oh, and they're like, yeah, we work at Fortinet, man. So
they were good sports about it, which I guess you'd have to be working at Fortinet.
Yeah. Oh, man. But I mean, like, imagine being career Fortinet at this point. Like just... it would be different, right? If they were like saying we're spending all of our money, we're going to get on top of this problem and spin up the most amazing security program you've ever heard. You just don't really hear a lot of that coming out of it.
No, I mean, they tend to announce vulnerabilities in other people's products they found, which is legitimate work and good. But there does seem to be some correlation between when there are Fortinet bugs, when they then subsequently announce other people's flaws, tends to kind of correlate with the media cycle for their own bugs. I'm not saying they're trying to squash their stories by burying them, but, the data is a little bit sus on that front.
You never know what's happening inside though, right? Like they might be just doing an incredible job on the next generation of products, and we're just too distracted by the failures of most of their stuff to even think about it. Oh man, it kills me. It's like Sophos, right? Sophos is a good example where a bunch of their stuff was getting owned, and then it turns out that they were running like counterintelligence operations against Chinese spies, and like,
so cool.
Had made really seriously good changes to their products. Like, a good example of that is Sophos has like a cloud management interface for a lot of its products, right? And it works really well and protects you against a lot of these sort of, perimeter-based attacks because the thing's checking into the, there's no open ports basically, right? So, this is a really cool thing, but often their customers choose not to use it, right? And it's like, who do you blame at that point? Is that their fault? Do we really expect them to say, no, you must use this cloud interface, which deals with these issues? I mean, at some point I kind of think, because I'm a bit of an absolutist, that maybe they should, but I guess, I'm not sticking up for Fortinet. I'm saying sometimes the situation's a little bit more complicated than you realize.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, to the wonderful world of next generation finance now, and a crypto mixing platform was raided by the European police. They seized $29 million in Bitcoin. It looks like this thing over the years had laundered something like $1.5 billion US, over the last 9 years or so. This is a piece by Darina Antoniuk over at The Record.
Yeah, this was an operation called Crypto Mixer that ran out of Switzerland, and I think Swiss and German authorities cooperated to dismantle it, seized a bunch of servers, as you say, some Bitcoin proceeds. They also seized, they said, 12 terabytes of data. And I'm curious if your only thing that you do as a cryptocurrency mixing service, 12 terabytes is quite a lot of data, and one hopes that it is the logs of the mixing process such that they can reverse it. And they don't say that in any of the docs from Europol or any of the reporting. But like, what else could 12 terabytes of data be worth seizing? And I hope that is what they've got, and they've got some way to reverse the mixing, and they can go backwards from there. And that will be an interesting thing to see whether 6 months from now we see a bunch of arrests or raids or whatever else coming out of Europol based on this data. But we don't know that. It's just kind of interesting data point.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, in the earlier days of stuff like Bitcoin, when everybody was using it to buy drugs off Silk Road, thinking that they were opsec geniuses. And then they realized, like, the creeping realization kind of came over the next few years of like, oh, the authorities could pretty much just look up my home address at this point based on historical blockchain information. But of course, cops were, too busy going after the sort of bigger suppliers and stuff to bother with people who are just buying drugs for personal use. But it is interesting how stuff that seems like a good idea at the time, often, as time progresses, seem like a less good idea in retrospect. We've also seen, there's another crypto story here. There's Lazarus, apparently Lazarus Group, or whatever you want to call them, the North Koreans have been accused of stealing $30 million from some South Korean crypto exchange. This one's by John Grieg, also at the Record.
Yeah, this one's called Upbit, is the name of the cryptocurrency exchange. They lost something like $30 million worth of cryptocurrency. There's a little bit of kind of discussion as to whether it was an insider assisted thing or whether there was some technical issue. The company itself actually put out a report that said, we're not saying that this is how we got our money stolen, but we did make some mistakes in our wallet system, and you could infer information about our key material from the signatures being placed on some of our stuff on the blockchain. And they're kind of suggesting they got actual crypto hacked by the North Koreans. But then other reports are it was an insider. Well, did
the North Koreans develop a quantum computer? Or did they send a guy to apply for a job at that?
Yeah, well, I mean,
it's like, which of these two is more likely, right?
Yes, Occam is firmly on the side of probably just an insider, and obviously that's a modus operandi that we've seen Lazarus do, fake job interviews and blah, 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 blah. But the crypto company would like you to think that it was very fancy crypto bugs that let them recover key material from the blockchain, both of which are bad. But if you will give your money to a cryptocurrency exchange, you kind of expect it to end up in North Korea's, nuclear weapons program anyway. So, yeah, everything normal.
Now, one thing South Korea does better than anyone else is data breaches, right? Because I swear, every time you see hear of a major data breach in South Korea, it's like, they got details on literally everyone in the country. Another one similar to that, there's like an Amazon-like company in South Korea where their the contact details of all of their customers leaked, right? So that's like, names, addresses, phone numbers, and whatnot. So, I mean, not terribly critical, but still useful data that you don't want floating around out there. But apparently it potentially affects 65% of the country's population. Alexander Martin wrote this one up, again, for their Record.
Yeah, I think it also maybe included some amount of order history data. Which could be interesting, I guess, if you're buying things that you wished not to have people not know about. But yeah, they, I think initial reporting said that there was something like 4,500 customer accounts worth of data were taken. But then that's expanded very rapidly to 65% of the entire population. South Korea always does seem to do things pretty large when it comes to, data breaches and loss. I mean, that telco hack that we've been following, that Catalan's been following over on Risky Bulletin, for the last little while, Korea Telecom KT, like that thing is just huge. And like they get to the point of having to replace all their SIM cards. So yeah, they definitely, do it at scale in South Korea. That is for sure.
They're getting owned world champions, I guess. All right, so we're gonna finish off this week's podcast with a discussion of the. I can't even, right? So this guy, 50-year-old Booz Allen Hamilton contractor who was working at the NSA, was basically catfishing teenage girls on Reddit and getting them to send him nudes. Now, that is bad.
Already bad, right? Already
it's
bad. It's
very, very bad. But what makes it incredibly stupid is he was doing this from his work computer, which, of course, at a workplace like NSA, you're going to expect, if there's nude images on there, there's probably some endpoint thing sitting there monitoring for inappropriate use of a work computer. And yeah, like it really does look like he was caught by NSA because the FBI got onto it after a quote, referral from another federal agency. So, I mean, just what a moron. This guy deserves everything he gets, not only for being a catfishing creep, but also for being a massive dumbass.
I know, you have to click through consent banners just to log into these systems which say your stuff's going to be monitored. Maybe don't do anything dumb, and yet here he is cruising Reddit like a chump. How did you think this was going to go? And I guess I mean, he hasn't. I guess we should probably say that he hasn't pled guilty or anything yet. But so, like, I guess this is all accused. But, geez, man, what were you thinking? Like,
Yeah.
And what is it with booze? Like, because that's where Snowden worked, right? As well.
They all Booz Allen Hamilton is a non-stop source of disastrous employees for NSA by the looks of things. But yeah, Douglas Jason Martin, good luck to you. And yes, as you point out, innocent until proven guilty. But man, by the time it's popping up in Forbes, yes, that's a lot of smoke.
If the NSA is fingering you to the FBI, probably you're, they don't want to wear the bad publicity if they didn't have to. And here they are wearing it.
Well, mate, that is actually it for the week's news. Thanks a lot for joining us, for joining me to have that discussion. Always great. And we'll do it again next week.
Yeah, thanks so much, Pat. I will see you next week.
That was Adam Boileau there with a look at the week's security news. Now we're going to hear from this week's sponsor, and this week's show is brought to you by Nebuloc, which is a startup focused on AI-enabled threat hunting, right? So, you might have attackers trying, partially successfully or even unsuccessfully to do various things in your organization, and your detection stack just isn't going to surface that sort of thing, which is why threat hunting, is a good thing to do. The problem with threat hunting, though, is it's a very specialist skill set and involves a lot of time. Right? And a lot of effort to actually go and make it fruitful. So Nebuloc was created with the idea of hey, why can't we just have vibe hunting, right? Why can't we just use natural language to ask questions about data collected in our environment? And you might find, hey, are there any remote management tools deployed on any of our computers? How did they get there? And onwards, right? So this is the idea. They got some great customers already. I'm working as an advisor with these guys, and Damien Lukey, who is our sponsor guest this week, very smart dude. And one of the things they realized, though, in building out this product is there were no really great sources of telemetry for Mac OS, right? For macOS. And EDR is a little bit vague in general, and especially on macOS, right? Where it's hey, something bad happened, or we stopped a bad thing from happening, but it doesn't really give you that many details. So he took a look at Sigma detections for macOS and realized they weren't really built out quite the way they wanted. So they've done a little bit of work there, and they've developed a thing they call Core Sigma. So I've linked through to Damien's blog post on that, and also to the GitHub repo for Core Sigma. But they've developed basically a whole bunch of detections for macOS that they then pipe into Elastic, and you can go and grab them off GitHub and have a look at them. But yeah, things like, as I mentioned at the top of the show, an unsigned kernel extension load in macOS, probably the sort of thing you want to know about. And there's a bunch of others as well. And we talk about a few of them in this interview with Damien Lukey, which starts now. Enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, macOS has been a second-class citizen in endpoint security for a really long time, despite the fact that it is increasingly more popular in enterprise environments. So beyond the fact that endpoint vendors have support for macOS, in the open source community, and when you think about particularly Sigma and being able to write detections as code, there's really good coverage for Windows and some coverage for Linux, but we don't really have a lot of coverage for Mac just because there isn't a lot of signal mapping, right? We've got two particular signal maps as it stands. And the challenge that we saw was hey, wait a minute. If we want to be able to understand at a more granular level what's happening across all macOS EDR suites, we need a way to figure out how to bridge that gap in telemetry. So basically, as it stood, there was an 85-ish% gap across MITRE tactics for Sigma, and we built Core Sigma. We built a new framework.
So what do you mean by signal mapping, right? Just explain that for people who are not au fait.
Yeah, basically the endpoint has a bunch of different events. These events need to be tagged. And what you need to do is basically take a bunch of different pieces of data, map them to a consistent format so that you can ultimately translate this stream of data, what's happening within an environment, to a detection language. So we saw that there was this gap in signal mapping from what was happening on macOS to how to interpret it as a Sigma rule. So we created a framework to help with that.
I mean, it's almost like you're trying to a degree, normalize these signals coming from macOS so that when you shove them into a data store, it's very much the same as the data sitting alongside it from Windows boxes. I mean, is that more or less, the vibe here?
Yeah, absolutely. But importantly, like, to not keep that proprietary or shelved away, right? We want to be able to provide that as something extensible. Probably 99.99% of all enterprise security environments are comprised of not just Windows machines, but have some sort of Mac presence. We want to give security teams the ability to normalize that data, right? To have the same level of visibility. So that was the inspiration behind it. And of course, it allows us to do all the fun hunting things that we do on the back end too.
Now, EDR platform's a little bit opaque when it comes to explaining why they're alerting on certain things on macOS, right? Because it's almost like I'm getting the impression that it's like 20 years ago when, the big leader in the, network intrusion detection space back then was Internet Security Systems, right? With their network-based sensor. And one of the funny things is they'd give you an alert, but they wouldn't give you a packet capture. They wouldn't actually explain the rule and how it alerted and why. Is EDR on Mac a little bit that way as well?
Yes, is the short answer. I think EDR is really good at giving you a good visual aid for what might have happened on a Mac machine, but it's still, we've remained in this like black box ecosystem still, right? Like that openness, that visibility, like beyond, this is critical and therefore it's bad. Why? Because I say so. We haven't gotten much better on the EDR side. So we want to be able to kind of crack open that black box and have more complete visibility, actually understand what happened. And as we know, EDR isn't going to catch everything. So what about all the other pesky things that get past that black box? Well, right now, teams don't really have that visibility or struggle with that visibility on macOS. So we want to give that visibility back.
Yeah. Now you've given a few examples. You say that you've mapped out like 50 production-ready Sigma rules. You've got 3 here, which are like all-timers, like absolute bangers. But are these not standard with like existing Sigma? Like that's before I list them, these aren't standard.
No. We didn't find any in terms of like we'll shout out the unsigned kernel extension load. No.
That's not not a standard alert. I mean, that is a big deal, right? So an unsigned number one here in your list of 3 out of 50 is an unsigned kernel extension load, which you're saying is a critical. And yeah, I mean, hello. I mean, it's very unusual to use kernel extensions in macOS at all. But the idea of using an unsigned kernel extension, and even if you want to use a signed kernel extension, you got to jump through a bunch of hoops to actually get that to work. So I imagine that by the time an unsigned kernel extension is popping up on a box, then things have gone really sideways.
Yeah. But I mean, the reality is obviously like Apple's very strong when it comes to operating system security, but they're not perfect. And the bigger problem that we're seeing really is like, beyond unsigned kernel extensions, macOS is increasingly getting targeted by adversaries. And we know like the quickest way to build a 13-foot ladder is a 12-foot wall. To your point, like, yes, a lot of things have gone bad, but like, I could be running on a macOS system. I get drawn to a watering hole site. I think I'm downloading, the macOS image for TeamViewer because I need to access somebody else's machine because I'm working in a help desk. And before I know it, it's got an unsigned kernel extension and I've got malware running on my box.
Yeah. So another one you've got here, number 2, is a SIG kill sent to security tools. Again, why is this not already there in Sigma?
It beats me, Patrick. I think, again, it really is because like Windows telemetry is really open. It's really straightforward to be able to focus your time on that. So I think it's just, again, like visibility predicates actionability. So all these people have just been focusing on a particular telemetry source that's really open, really extensible. Like everybody knows Windows. So it's really easy to write detections for it. I think the other challenge was signal mapping, right? Like we weren't able to necessarily get the same kind of visibility into macOS. So even if we wanted to write a SIG kill detection, it wasn't necessarily obvious how to do that. And the other question is like, since it's open source and we're doing it out of the goodness of our heart, was the juice worth the squeeze?
And was it? Or is it too early to say?
I mean, it's been really exciting to see like what people, the feedback that we've gotten, right? Our whole approach in terms of, sharing all of this is to provide a framework so that every organization has the same visibility into their macOS environment, right? Like it doesn't need to just belong to Nebulonc. Like everyone should have that right.
Yeah, and the third one that you've highlighted, which is just a handy one to have stored somewhere else, right, is when macOS itself either quarantines a file or detects something via Xprotect. It's great that macOS will do that and shut it down, but it's not exactly chatty about it, right? It's not really set up to integrate with seams and things like that, so there's been a malware detection on a machine. So you can pipe that out into... all of this goes into Elastic, right?
Yes. We built everything with an Elastic backend. We have like a breakdown of our architecture. So if people want to redo the experiment or run this themselves, we're more than happy to share how we did it.
Yeah. So I'm guessing the rationale, I see too that you put this in as a pull request with 1 bit of Sigma, and they're like, well, it doesn't belong here. And you're still trying to figure out like quite where you might give it to them, or you're just going to have to run it as standalone. But I'm guessing the reason you did this is being kind of a threat hunting platform. I mean, threat hunting relies on telemetry, right? So I'm guessing you're just trying to fill out that sort of completeness of data coming from the Mac systems in the environments you're in. Is that about the long and short of it?
Yeah, I mean, you're completely correct, right? Hunting is entirely predicated on visibility, right? So I actually liked the third example of the detection that we used, right? Being able to show UL quarantining. You want to know everything that's going on so that you can hunt effectively. So for us as a hunting platform, being able to first map and understand what's actually happening inside a macOS environment means that we can get the same kind of visibility across EDR platforms and across operating system platforms, which is key. I want to be able to put my money where my mouth is and say, hey, we can do visibility across all these operating systems. We can actually see telemetry. And if you don't have that visibility, it's really hard to do hunting.
Yeah. So have you deployed this stuff in Anger yet? Is it up and running?
Yep. We're open. We've got a lot of macOS coverage, I'd say a bit beyond what we've got going on in Core Sigma. But we also want everybody to have access to this kind of capability.
Yeah. And did you find that once you turned this stuff on in an environment, it was like, were you getting more alerts than you expected, or was it like less chatty? Like what was the vibe there?
In terms of chattiness, it wasn't super FP prone, right? The way that we think about hunting is like you want many different sources of signal, right? You want to understand several events occurring in real time. I think one of the classic pitfalls when people think about threat hunting is alert detection, like alert hunt. For us, we use these detections as a series of triggers, right? To understand, okay, if A, then B, then C, like that goes from a medium to a critical, right? Or if we can see these kind of pre-indications, it just allows us to be a bit more proactive instead of being like, oh snap, 8 things have fired and now we have to take action. So we've seen a lot of value in it, but of course there's always a bit of fine tuning that you got to do too.
Yeah,
I would never take like a detection and just like chuck it into prod. You always want to do good testing, hygiene, stuff like that.
I guess what I'm trying to understand is, so, obviously the top 3 that we just talked about, they are like really good detections, but, obviously in those 50, there's going to be stuff that's like below that threshold.
100%.
How has that been useful in, doing some hunts in your customers' environments?
A few different ways. First way is, of the 50 detections that we've published, right, they've got varying severity levels. So a lot of times, like, you might get some lows, and it's just valuable information, right? Maybe you've got a risky user who downloads one too many files, or somebody, is using PB paste to copy and paste commands when they shouldn't.
Yeah.
But then you go kind of one step further, and on the customer side, what we've actually seen a lot of, and where the macOS visibility has been really helpful is in macOS specific malware, and then a lot of remote access tools, right? So folks using a combination of capabilities to do like a drive-by download, write to disk, and then try and open up a C2 channel as a for example.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's going to be handy, right? When you see, and you will see that thanks to these rules.
Whereas
previously
100%.
You would not even have that data to hunt on, right? I mean, that's kind of that's the point of what we're talking about.
Yeah, right. And of course, there's always like the hygiene perspective too. Whenever it comes to like writing and deploying rules, right, you always want to like run it against production data, and it's really helpful for us to also understand, okay, when you're building a new framework and you have greater visibility, then there's also the question of like, okay, how is this going to perform in real time? So we also had to go through a series of steps of like, okay, we've got all these ways to generate signal. Let's actually run this against production data and like see how valuable this rule is, how chatty it is. Does it require fine tuning? And that's an iterative process. Some fine tuning was required on a few, but now we're able to say, hand on heart, our macOS visibility is commensurate with and our Windows visibility, which is really important for a hunting team.
Now, before we wrap it up, I'm just really curious here about how this came together, because I'm just going to take a wild guess, because I've worked with so many startups where they wind up throwing together like a set of features for Mac and paying a lot of attention to Mac, because there's that one big customer who comes along and says, hey, we'd love to buy this, but we need support for Mac. Is that what happened here?
No, actually, it's funny. It was based around the fact that like most of our customers use Mac, right? Like,
yeah, right. Okay.
Gone are the days of just the Windows Enterprise, although they still exist.
Or the one really weird modern, Silicon Valley company that's like 80% Mac or whatever.
Exactly. For us, no, it was just the fact that there was Mac everywhere, and we were like, there's got to be a better way. We have to understand what's happening. So very much born out of need.
All right. Well, Damien Lukey, thank you very much for joining us to talk through all of the work you're doing in, extending Sigma out to do better telemetry on macOS. I'm sure that's going to be interesting to a number of our listeners. I'll drop a link to the blog post talking about that into this week's show notes. Thanks again.
Thank you, Pat.
That was Damien Lukey of Nebulock there. And if you want to get into some vibe hunting, you can just look up Nebulock, Nebulock. If you Google for Nebulock Security, you are going to find them. But that is it for this week's show. I do hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back next week with more security news and analysis. But until then, I've been Patrick Gray. Thanks for listening.